The joke of the day. I don't really have a joke so much as something strange happened to me in traffic again. I've already told you guys about the sheep driving the pickup truck, haven't I? Well, today, coming in, same location, maybe a little bit farther down Reynolds as I was getting closer to Lander, driving through one of those subdivisions. I knew I was driving behind a witch for some time coming in. I come in from Coronacre on 72 because her tail lights were out. And she was waving to whenever we would come up to us, make a turn, she would do her wand out the window, to indicate the right and left turn, that kind of stuff. And I just happened to be still following her as we got close to campus. I'll be darned, she did the right turn signal coming down Reynolds Avenue, and right before my eyes, she turned into a driveway. Yeah. This is a very manageable class. I'll probably get you out a little bit early, even with the stupid joke to start off with, and we'll conclude with an exercise. But cast your mind back to that happy moment in 1798 when the Federalist-controlled Congress and White House passed the Sedition Act, criminalizing speech, whether uttered or written or published, that criticized the government, with a $2,000 fine, as much as a $2,000 fine, and 2 years of imprisonment. And I ask this question. You guys all unanimously on your exercises, as memory serves, agreed it was a violation of the First Amendment, and not even an ambiguous, subtle violation. It was a spectacular violation of the First Amendment, an obvious violation. And I asked this question, what can you do about it? Maybe some of you guys secretly knew, but nobody said it out loud. In 1798, nobody knew. James Madison, you need this slide a little longer? This is basically the same question I asked last class. What can you do? Come on in. Hello, good morning. What's that? James Madison didn't know what to do about it. He, more than anyone else, had written the Constitution. Thomas Jefferson didn't know what to do about it. So they thought, and they thought, and they thought, and wrote essays. I mentioned this last class, but I wanted to go ahead and put it on the board here just to make sure we quickly mentioned it. The Kentucky and Virginia resolutions. Essays written by James Madison and Thomas Jefferson on this issue. What can be done about a law of Congress that is not in agreement with the Constitution? And the basic idea behind these essays is quite simple, that the states maybe, it wasn't a law, was never actually put into practice, but they just dreamed up the idea, maybe the states could protect the people. So it's a form of states' rights. The states could refuse to implement the law and shield their citizens. So it's an early version of states' rights thinking that became more prominent in the South, getting closer to as we approach the Civil War. They were spared in this case. The Sedition Act, if you remember, was set to expire in 1801 because that's 1 year after the presidential election of 1800, and the Federalists wanted to make sure they had the freedom to criticize the government if they happened to be voted out of office. And they were. They were voted out of office. So that particular law disappeared. And Thomas Jefferson was elected president. If you remember, I've got the name Republicans up here, but this is not the modern Republican Party. This is the Jeffersonian Republicans or Democratic Republicans. If you remember, Thomas Jefferson was a proponent of a weak central government. It was stronger than the Articles of Confederation, but he didn't want it to be too strong. And he was a strict constructionist, meaning he believed the government should have only those powers specifically written in the Constitution. But his presidency served to strengthen the central government. This happens to politicians sometimes. The things they campaign on, things maybe they actually believed when they were candidates running for office, once they're in power, events, circumstances, sometimes, not always, but sometimes turns them around and they end up accomplishing something different than they would have preferred when they were just dreaming about being in power. And that was true in some ways of Thomas Jefferson and his presidency. It served to strengthen, his presidency strengthened the federal government. You ready to move forward? One more minute. One of these days I'll learn how to boost my text up over that little camera circle. And then we'll really be cooking with gas. Huh? Yeah, he would have preferred a weak central government. But I'm going to show you guys a couple of highlights from the Jefferson presidency that suggest he accomplished something else, a stronger central government. And the first one has to do with that question: what can you do about a law of Congress that does not agree with the Constitution? Here it is, Supreme Court case of Marbury versus Madison, 1803. If you remember nothing else from History 111, years in the future, once you've forgotten all about poor old Dr. Ramsay, if you can remember Marbury versus Madison, it will provide you with good service in any type of argument, political argument, cultural argument. I mean, it may be a friendly debate, but it will provide you with good service. Your opponents, those talking to you, will be quite impressed that you're able to summon up Marbury versus Madison. There's no more important Supreme Court case, or at least there are very few, than Marbury versus Madison. Madison is on the left, the author of the Constitution. Jefferson was elected president. The Jeffersonian Republicans gained the White House. And Madison, of course, was one of Jefferson's friends, a Jeffersonian Republican, Democratic Republican. He was appointed Secretary of State. The outgoing Federalists were so angry at having lost power. John Adams, the president, before he was out of office, appointed lots and lots of judges to the court system. He wanted Federalist thinking judges in control of those court benches. And William Marbury, the guy on the right, much less famous than Madison. William Marbury was just one of those ordinary guys, attorneys, appointed as a judge by John Adams in the last few hours of Adams' presidency. And both Jefferson and Madison were kind of peeved at this behavior, that the Federalists would do this, appoint all of these guys at the last minute. And so Madison refused to give him his papers. Marbury showed up at the Secretary of State's office requesting the paperwork so he could begin the work of judging people to be guilty or innocent and so forth. And Madison would not give him his papers. That was the start of the case. Marbury filed a lawsuit. It rose all the way up to the Supreme Court. And here's the crux of the matter. Very simple. John Marshall was the justice who wrote the opinion, And he'll come back. He's one of the most famous justices. He'll be with us for another week or two, making other decisions, John Marshall. In his opinion, in his ruling, he said that the law, the applicable law in this case, did not conform, did not agree with the Constitution. Same issue as the Sedition Act of 1798. But the only law in the books relating to this case, he said, was not in agreement with the Constitution. And he asked this question. Here it is, in his opinion, the conclusion to his opinion. When presented with this type of dilemma, when the judge of a case has a law of Congress that applies to the case and the Constitution, and the two don't say the same thing, which one, you think about it for a minute, which one should the judge go with in his final decision? The law of Congress or the Constitution? One vote for the Constitution, 2 votes for the Constitution, 3. Number of people saying, yeah, that was his answer. It's got to be the Constitution. If you accept a law of Congress instead of the Constitution, then what was the point of writing a Constitution in the first place? So it's a very simple question, but a profound answer. He said, in that type of situation, the judge has to go with the Constitution. And the moment he said that, the power of the Supreme Court was amplified many times. He created, in that moment, what we call judicial review. The power of the Supreme Court to decide whether a law of Congress is constitutional or not. And if it's not, to strike it down and ignore that law, to declare a law of Congress unconstitutional. The Supreme Court, in that instant, became far more powerful than it had ever been. Almost an equal branch of the government, capable of striking down a law of Congress. And James Madison, the author of the Constitution, did not see it coming. He was a defendant in the case. He was as surprised as anybody. For the rest of your life, you will hear activists telling you that judicial review is not in the Constitution. It's not, but it's absolutely inescapable, based on John Marshall's question. The Supreme Court has to judge, has to take the Constitution, rather than a law of Congress if they don't agree with each other. Sorry, once again, obscured by the camera circle. Judicial review, an essential term for your notes. You ready for the next one? So that's just one way that Jefferson's presidency saw the central government strengthened far more than it had been prior to his presidency. And secondly, the very same year, way over in France, Napoleon Bonaparte needed money for his army. He was fighting the British, had a number of military expenditures that he needed to cover. And Louisiana was not doing France very much good. He had at one time had dreams of rebuilding the French Empire in North America, but the war with Great Britain distracted him. He realized that was never going to happen. So he put Louisiana up for sale. He wanted quick cash so he could buy cannons and guns and uniforms to fight the British over there in Europe. And remember, Thomas Jefferson wanted the United States to be an agricultural republic. He did not want the United States to become an industrial power like Alexander Hamilton wanted. He wanted yeoman farmers, small farmers in control of their farms who had virtue and were independent-minded. And when he saw Louisiana, the Louisiana Territory, go up for sale, he wanted it for the United States, because if he could acquire all of that territory, Laser pointer activate. There's Louisiana. New Orleans down there at the mouth of the Mississippi River. Now, truth be told, the French, I think I've made this point, and Spanish settlers as well, only occupied the lower stretches of the Mississippi River, but they claimed legal title to all of this pink territory, and in fact, this is not all of it, all the way west to the Pacific Ocean. So there were no French settlers living in most of that. That was Indian territory, but the French said it. And so all of this territory west to the Pacific Ocean. Maybe some French traders had stumbled through there or were in the process of wandering about, but it was not occupied and controlled by the French. But they put it up for sale, and Thomas Jefferson thought to himself, if the United States could acquire all that land, millions of acres of land west of the Mississippi River, that would ensure that Americans could stay farmers long, long, long into the future. Even if the population is increasing, there'll be enough land for yeoman farmers to keep tilling the soil and so on. So he wanted that territory, but he knew perfectly well the Constitution does not give the president the power to make that kind of purchase. But he did it because he thought this was a once-in-a-lifetime chance to buy most of North America west of the Pacific River, Pacific Ocean. Congress had to pass a special law giving him the power, but in the process, he strengthened. He, of course, did make the purchase. He spent the money, bought the Louisiana Territory in 1803. And the process, he strengthened the presidency. He made the executive office a more powerful office than it had been prior to him. So just a couple of highlights of how Jefferson accomplished Federalist ambitions in a number of ways. And then, of course, he sent Lewis and Clark to explore all of that territory. There they are. Meriwether Lewis on the right, William Clark on the left. Setting out from St. Louis in 1804 on a scientific diplomatic mission. They were supposed to take notes about new plants and animals that they encountered on this journey into territory that most white Americans had never seen. The French themselves, of course, were claiming ownership. They didn't know themselves what was out there for sure. But Lewis and Clark set out from around St. Louis, traveled up into Sioux Indian Territory. Can I move forward? There's a map. So starting off right about here, they moved up into Sioux Indian Territory for that first winter. And they hired a French trader named Pierre Charbonneau. You guys want me to write his name down? One person does. God's honest truth is I'm not 100% sure how to spell it, but I'll give it a shot. Charbonneau, a Frenchman who had been out west. He was hired as a guide. But the most important part of that transaction was he owned a slave. You're just flexing? I don't know exactly how he acquired her. I think the Sioux Indians owed him some type of debt, and they had captured her as a girl. Either they or the Comanches, and she had been traded to the Sioux. That part of the story I don't remember. She was a Shoshone Indian from way out here Nowadays, the Shoshone Reservation is in western Montana, eastern Idaho, southern Idaho, on the western side of the Rocky Mountains. She had been captured as a child, young girl, and traded westward to the Sioux Indians, and Pierre Charbonneau had acquired her as his property. So for her, there was no choice. She had to go on the expedition along with the Lewis and Clark expedition. He turned out to be pretty close to useless in terms of guidance. Once they got beyond Sioux Indian country, he did not really know where he was, couldn't speak a lot of languages. She, on the other hand, had been through that territory, had learned to speak a number of those languages, and of course, once they crossed over the Rocky Mountains, by that time, by the way, the expedition was in sorry shape. They crossed the Rocky Mountains. They were marching into Shoshone Indian territory. She could speak Shoshone. She still had family members among the Shoshone Indians. She had friends. So she was a huge assistance as they moved west of the Rocky Mountains. And by the way, that's the moment. The last vestiges of the dream of Northwest Passage died. If you recall, the Virginia settlers were hoping in 1607 they might find the Northwest Passage, a water route through North America straight to the Pacific Ocean. Lewis and Clark were able to report back to Thomas Jefferson a couple of years later with a high degree of confidence that there is no way of paddling a canoe all the way to the Pacific Ocean. The Rocky Mountains will not allow it. So goodbye to the dream of a Northwest Passage. You remember the name of that young woman? Everybody knows it. Sacagawea, yeah. Who is, random historical trivia, I think, the most frequently depicted person in terms of statuary, official commemorative statues and plaques, that sort of thing out west? You can do a Google search, statue of Sacagawea, and likely what you'll see in the images is this. The vast majority of statues of Sacagawea, I think I've got a picture of her on a coin. There she is. The vast majority of statues that you come across on the side of the road or in town plazas out west have her pointing, as if guiding the expedition, showing the way for Lewis and Clark. And the coin is accurate. She had just given birth prior to leaving his child, I think a young boy, little boy. So she was carrying an infant most of the way for 3 years until he was a toddler when they got back in 1806. I think it's worth pausing for just a moment to imagine that level of difficulty. I was a very involved father with all 3 of my children. I've changed thousands of diapers. But doing it while crossing the country on foot, the Rocky Mountains, for God's sake, is unimaginable. So this was a pretty significant feat in terms of human endurance as well. But here is your challenge. This will wrap things up for the day. Clearly, based on my slide here, and you guys already knew this, Sacagawea has been celebrated by being placed on a United States coin. I believe it's a $1 coin. Am I right? Have you got one? A couple of people have one. Sacagawea is on a coin. I'm going to pass out a worksheet in just a moment, asking you to write a paragraph. A paragraph meaning at least 4 sentences. The bar is pretty low on these classroom exercises, but there is a bar. So if you come in at 3 sentences, Dr. Ramsey is going to return the worksheet to you and ask you to work a little harder to try and reach the promised land of four complete sentences. Creating your own argument as to why Sacagawea is on a coin but not Tecumseh. That make sense?